Hello everyone, I'm Andrea from Andrea Flipping Unique. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for joining. If you've seen a couple of my previous videos, you might have already gotten a glimpse of this dresser. It's a mid-century modern basset dresser I found on a Facebook marketplace for $30, and although I don't really hate the color that it does have a really bad paint job. My overall goal for this dresser is to actually make it into a matching set with a pair of nightstands that I've had that just haven't been selling. So if you want to see what I do to accomplish that, then stick around and continue watching. Okay, so it wouldn't be a proper furniture refinishing project if there wasn't something that I had to try to rebuild, and that is what we have here. So overall, this dresser is in pretty decent condition. It does have some really good bones. The back does need to be replaced, but it's really sturdy. The only issue I have is this one drawer. So you can clearly see it's missing a big chunk out of it. I'm not going to sell it like this. I think it looks terrible, and that takes out a lot of space from the drawer. So instead of going right to cleaning and trying to get the paint off, I want to see if I'm able to fix this drawer. If not, then I'm just going to sell it as is and have somebody else take it on. So what I'm planning on doing is I have all of these other mid-century modern drawers that came out of a different dresser that I wasn't able to save, but I did hang on to the drawers. And I think, I don't know if the dovetails are going to fit or not, but it's still too short this way. So regardless, I can't just take the whole piece out and put it on because it's still going to be too short. But what I'm thinking of doing is leveling this off, because this does go up on a bit of an angle, and taking a piece from here and seeing maybe if these dovetails will fit in this one. And then I can just, glue the two pieces together and then trace out the ones in the back and cut those out. If that doesn't work, then I do have the whole back piece that I can just, cut out different dovetails. But I'm hoping, I think these ones might be too big, but I'm going to try it anyway and see if I can, finagle something. But that's what I plan on doing. So again, I'm going to even this out and then just take a side and try to puzzle piece something back together. So I'm going to start that now. Wish me luck, and hopefully I can do it. I started out by leveling out this side, and I did that by using my L square. And when that was done, I just popped it out and cut it with my bandsaw. Then I took that piece and laid it on top of the new side and traced out that edge to where I needed it. Luckily, these dovetails were the correct width. They were just a little bit too long, so I also marked off the excess that needed to be cut. Then I went back over to my bandsaw and cut all of that off. After that was cut, I made sure everything lined up okay, and then I traced out the back dovetails. I then went back over to my bandsaw to cut everything off. I went back to make sure that everything fit okay. I did end up having to make a few adjustments on my cuts, but it did eventually fit. I then made a straight line, cut off all the excess, and then I went back in with my orbital sander and made a round edge for the top because that's how all of the other drawers were finished. When I first took this side piece off, I didn't realize it had another crack in it. That's why some of it is still attached to the side of the drawer. But I ended up putting everything back together using wood glue and made sure to get it really good in the dovetails so that it wouldn't fall apart again. The new piece of wood that I used was slightly thinner than the original, so there was a little bit of a height difference between the two, but I just fixed that by using my orbital sander and 80 grit sandpaper to sand everything flush. Now, because I can't cut perfectly, there was a slight little bit of a gap between the two pieces of wood, so to fix that, I ended up making my own wood filler. To do this, I just took some scrap wood that I had laying around and sanded it on 80 grit sandpaper till I had a good pile of wood dust. And then I put some wood glue into the crack and just put the dust on top of the glue and kind of smushed it down. I did have to do a couple of rounds of this because the glue did settle down into the crack, but it was still a better alternative than going to the store and buying new wood filler. After everything was dry, I sanded it all down and I had a brand new drawer. After the drawer was fixed, I was able to move on to my normal stuff, and that was cleaning and removing the hardware and taking all of the drawers out. I didn't know if this piece had a maker's mark on it. And normally, any like dresser that I've seen, the maker's mark has always been like on a top drawer on the left-hand side. And this one is actually in the back. So this is a Bassett dresser, and that's really exciting because those are really well made pieces of furniture. And I just discovered that I think I'm gonna have to take this drawer apart because somebody tried to fix it and did a number with glue and nails. So I don't know if you can see that. There's little nails all in through here. So if you're fixing a drawer, nails are not necessary. Just make sure that everything's good and cleaned out and glue it back together and you'll be fine. After realizing I had more on my plate than what I thought, I decided to have that be a later problem, and I decided to go ahead and start removing this base. The front part was easy to remove because it was just in there with some screws, but the sides had to be cut. The sides of the dresser were made out of plywood, so to avoid splintering when I was cutting, I put down some painter's tape first. I then took my L square and made a straight line coming from where the new bottom of the dresser was going to be. I made sure it was the same width on both sides, and then I cut it off using my circular saw. I then repeated the same process on the other side. I wanted to build a new base for this dresser, but I needed to raise the existing supports up a little bit, so I ended up taking a bunch of scrap wood that I had, measuring it and cutting it to size, and then attaching it to the existing supports. I initially used wood glue to attach all of the wood to the supports. I did later go back in and use some nails to make sure it was extra secure. Unfortunately, I did forget to film that, so you can't see it. To make my base, I start off by making a template for my legs using 1/4-inch plywood. I measure for the height that I need them to be. In this case, it was 3.5 inches. I then take the wood that I'm going to be using for my side skirt and line it up to the top of the leg and draw a line on the bottom. This way I know that my leg and my side skirt will be the exact same width. I then start playing around with the angle and the curve of my legs. I don't have a lot of rhyme or reason to this other than this does have to hold up the weight of a dresser, so I don't want my angle to be too severe and I want to make sure that I have enough width on the bottom of the leg to hold everything up. I also want to make sure that the curved part does lead out to a straight line, that way I have something to attach my skirt to. When I have the leg to my liking, I'll cut off the straight parts with my miter saw and then do the curved part with my bandsaw. You want to try to get as close to the line as you can, and if need be, you can go in with a sander or even a Dremel tool to sand down the rest. Once my template is to my liking, I'll then take it and trace it out on my wood. This dresser is on the smaller side and isn't extremely heavy, so I'm using a 1x6 oak board. If it was bigger, I definitely would be using a thicker piece of wood. Also, while you're tracing out your legs, make sure that the grain is going vertically with them instead of horizontally so that they're more stable. Once I have all of my legs cut out, I'll do the same as I did with the template and cut all the straight edges with my miter saw and all of the curved edges with my bandsaw. When cutting out the curved part of the legs with my bandsaw, I do try to get as close to the curve as I can. If I can't, I'll go back in with my sander and sand down the rest. If you're worried about cutting too much off, you can also use your template as a guide and use a flush trim router bit on your router to route out the rest. The next thing I had to do was measure for the front and side skirts. I didn't want my legs to extend past the side of the dresser, so I used a piece of wood, butt it up against the side, and then push the leg up till it touches that piece of wood. Once I have my leg where it needs to be, I'll go ahead and mark it on the support with a pencil. I then repeat the same process on the other side of the dresser. I then used the 2 inside marks I made to measure out my front skirt and then cut it out with my miter saw. I hit record when I thought I was hitting stop, so let's just pretend I actually cut this piece of wood. Zzz. Once I have it cut, I just measure it again to make sure that everything fits okay, and then I move on to doing the same thing on the sides. Once all of the skirts are cut out to the length that I need them, then I'll start drilling my pocket holes. You're going to need them on each end of your skirts on the same side. I use 1x2 oak boards for my skirts, so they weren't wide enough to put pocket holes in so that I could attach them to my supports. Instead, I did pilot holes on the thin side of the board going all the way through, and then I used a countersink drill bit to drill where I put my pilot holes, that way my screws wouldn't stick out. However, I would recommend if you're going to be routing your skirts, I would save this until after that's done, and I'll show you why in a minute. I then attached my front legs to my front skirt so that I could route everything all at the same time. I used super glue to attach them first before screwing them in, that way they're not moving around. I also used an activator so that the glue would dry super fast. I then clamped down my piece of wood and used Kreg screws to screw everything together. So here's where I had my little mishap. When I was doing my countersink holes, I had an absolute brain fart, not thinking that my router was going to be going into that hole, and as you can see here, it did, and it lifted up the whole thing off the table. So after contemplating my move for the next couple of seconds, I decided I was still going to continue to route, but I was going to skip those holes and use my orbital sander to round them off instead. For this base, I did use a 3/4 inch roundover bit, but you can use whatever size you like, or you can choose not to do the roundover at all. On the front and side skirts, you want to just route the outside bottom. Because of my little mistake, I did route both sides of the front skirt on this one. And the legs, you want to do the curved part and the outside part, but don't touch the top or the feet. After I had everything routed and sanded down, I did go back in with my orbital sander and a foam pad with 180 grit sandpaper just to make sure everything was really good and smooth so that I could stain it. Before I attached the rest of my base together, I did go in and stain everything first. After the stain was dry, I then went and assembled the rest of the base. I started off by attaching the side skirts to the front legs. I used the same super glue method so that nothing would move when I was screwing them together. After the side skirts were on, I then attached the back legs using the same method. And after the whole thing was put together, I finally attached it to the supports using wood screws. In between making the base, I also was removing the paint off of the dresser. I wasn't too concerned with saving the veneer, so I just used my orbital sander and 100 grit sandpaper to remove it all. The veneer on this thing wasn't in the best condition. There were a couple of spots that it was missing, and it had that blonde finish, so it was all embedded in the grain. Instead, what I was going to do was re-veneer some of it and then paint the rest. After the paint was removed, I then went and removed this back and replaced it with a new one. I don't always replace the backs of my pieces, but this one was made out of plywood and it was splitting and it looked really terrible. I bought a sheet of tempered hardboard, took the old backing and traced out a new one, cut it out, and then attached it using nails. If you're one to struggle with putting these tiny nails in, drill a pilot hole first. Just make sure your drill bit is smaller than the diameter of the nail, and then nail it in. The next thing I did was add new veneer to the top of this dresser. I had used the same veneer on the nightstands and wanted this dresser to match, and I had just enough to do the top and a few of the drawers. I start off by cutting my veneer so it's a little bit bigger than the piece that I'm placing it on. This will ensure that the whole area is going to be covered with the veneer. I then apply 2 coats of contact cement, both to the wrong side of the veneer and the substrate I'm going to be sticking it to. There are different glues and application methods that you can use, so do your research and figure out what's going to work best for you. This is what I prefer to do. After the glue's dried for a bit, I then place down some square dowels. This will keep the veneer from making contact with the substrate before you're ready to place it, because once this stuff makes contact with each other, it is stuck. I then place the veneer on top of the dowels and make sure it's lined up. If everything looks good, I then remove the first dowel and start to place it down. You're going to want to make sure that you use a lot of pressure when you're smoothing this out, because that is what is going to get the glue to stick. After the veneer is completely attached, I will go back over it again and smooth it out some more to make sure that there's no air bubbles and everything is stuck really well. After it's been attached, I'll go back in with an X-Acto knife and some sandpaper and trim and smooth off the edges. You can also use a special trimmer for this, or even a flush trim router bit, but this is what works for me. After the top is trimmed, I'll go in and add some edge banding. I cut it to size and then attach it using an iron. Make sure your iron is on low heat and don't stay in one spot for too long because you can risk burning it. After it's attached, I like to go back and really press that glue out on the edges so it creates a nice seam. I'll go in and trim off the excess glue and then sand it. After the veneer and edge banding were all attached, I went and stained everything the same color as I stained the base. While that was drying, I mixed up some wood putty and filled in all the old hardware holes and any veneer that was missing. I also ended up taking apart that one drawer that was put together wrong. I cleaned out all of the glue and the nails and then reattached everything together. Unfortunately, a lot of the dovetails were broken off from the previous repair, so to fix that, I filled in all of the gaps with wood putty and then sanded them down. After sanding down the rest of the wood putty, I went and started doing a top coat on my veneer. This is where I ran into a little bit of an issue. About 10 minutes after I applied my top coat, my veneer started to bubble. This can happen for a couple of reasons. There wasn't enough glue, there wasn't enough pressure applied, or there was some low spots in the substrate that I didn't notice, which I think in this case is what happened. It's not the end of the world if this happens. There are a couple of ways you can fix it. One being you can use an iron, which is what I'm doing here, to heat up the glue again and press the bubbles down. Another is you can slice the veneer with the grain and put a little bit of glue underneath and glue it back down that way. Unfortunately, while I was doing that, I ended up scratching the surface and had to sand the whole thing down and restain it. So instead of using a water-based top coat this time, I ended up using an oil base to avoid that bubbling from happening again. While that was drying, I went ahead and primed the rest of my piece that I was going to be painting. I ended up doing 2 coats and I sanded in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper. I didn't want to fill in the grain before painting because I actually like the look of the grain showing through the paint, but I had made these hardware hole repairs that I knew if I painted over you would have been able to see them. So to camouflage them, I took an X-Acto knife and made little cut marks in them. That way when I painted over them, everything would look like grain. After I had sanded down all of my primer, it was time to move on to paint. I chose to do Truly Olive from Behr, which is one of my absolute favorite colors, but I already know that I'm going to get some hate for this. This is definitely a color that you either love it or you hate it, and if you hate it, you think it looks like baby poop. I wanted to keep with a mid-century modern vibe, and I think this color is perfect for that, especially with the stain that I chose. But again, I know that some people are going to hate it. So if you want to tell me in the comments that you don't like it, just please be respectful and don't wish death upon me. The coverage on this particular color isn't the best, so I did end up doing 3 coats of it, and I sanded in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper. I also did a top coat that I rolled on, and I mixed a little bit of paint into my top coat. Unfortunately, I didn't film it, but I do have some old footage of an old project that I did with the same color, so you can see what I did. After everything was painted and top coated, I also went back in and painted all of the dovetail joints. I normally don't do this, but because I did make these repairs, I wanted to make sure that they were covered. And the last couple of things that I had to do were to add some drawer liners, the hardware, and wax all of the drawers. After taking one final look, I realized how much I actually hated this top, and the oil spray ended up being streaky on it. So me being me, I actually resanded the whole entire thing, restained it, and tried the water-based top coat one more time, but I did extremely thin coats, and I think I ended up doing 5 coats, and it came out so much better. So before I show you what it looks like now, I wanted to remind you of what it looked like before. And if you want to see more furniture flips, restorations, and the occasional DIY, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And this is what it looks like now. I'm glad that I was able to fix that drawer in the beginning, and I'm glad I made the last minute decision to redo the top one more time because it looks so much better. I ended up rebuilding the bases of the nightstand to match the dresser, and they're both painted the same color, and I think they look incredible together. So if you stick around to the very end, you'll be able to see them. So like always, thank you for spending some time with me. Hopefully you learned something new or you were inspired a little bit. Let me know what you think in the comments. Just be respectful, and I'll talk to y'all soon.